Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the National Gallery. My name is Matthew Morgan, and for the next half an hour we're going to be thinking about this painting here by one of my favourite artists, J.M.W. Turner. He is not just one of my favourite British artists, he is one of my favourite artists of all time. And I hope by the end of this talk, some, if not all of you, will agree with me. This is the third lecture that we are having in a series of 6 lectures where we are thinking about the history of the National Gallery in 6 paintings. We have started at the beginning of the gallery with the very first painting, NG1, and now we come up to the middle of the 19th century. One of the other things that I want to think about, to talk about in this lecture, is the idea of what is displayed. How does the gallery, how do curators decide on what we see? And how do those decisions change over time? How are they impacted and affected by what is happening in the wider world, not just the art world? This painting, The Evening Star, is a favourite in the National Gallery by Turner. It is a picture of a sea scene. We have the beach here, the rather dark sea, and this wonderfully painted sky. I think it's a very calm painting, very tranquil painting. One of the words that often comes to my mind when thinking about it is delicate. There's not a lot of movement happening here, unlike a lot of paintings by Turner, where there's very often a lot of movement. He's a very melodramatic painter. There's very often a lot of narrative and action going on. We don't get that here. In fact, I think you have to look quite carefully to see any movement at all. This little dog here, beautiful, fantastic piece of painting by Turner. This little dog jumping up and down on his hind legs. This boy here with a net over his shoulder and a creel, a basket, in front of him, and he's looking into it. Maybe he's about to pull out something for the dog to eat. Dog is waiting for a shrimp or a crab or whatever the boy has got. But that's really the only movement that is happening. It's very still. The sun, we can see perhaps behind these clouds with this pink color here, applied with a palette knife. There is a very strong impasto, very strong thickness to the paint happening here. But these, I think, rather wonderful grey, purplish clouds. And we are at this scene, we are at this moment where the sun is setting, but it's not yet nighttime. We are at this transitional moment, a liminal moment perhaps, between day and night. And in this moment, at this time, we have a star coming out. Now, I'm pointing up here. You may not be able to see from where you're sitting. It's very small, also painted with impasto. There is the contour of the paint you can see on the canvas. It's been pushed on. You might more easily be able to see the star's reflection here in the sea. And this is one of Turner's continuing obsessions throughout his artistic career, the effect of light on water. So we have this very calm, very relaxed, very delicate painting. It's been described as a symphony of colors. Turner gave this painting to the National Gallery, along with a large number of other paintings. We don't know exactly when this painting was painted, and it's been suggested that it might have been painted in about 1830. And this suggestion comes from a linkage that art historian called Alfred Finberg made when he was cataloguing Turner's watercolors and works on paper. And in one of Turner's workbooks, he discovered a poem that Turner had been trying to write about just this very moment between night and day, between light and dark. And so Finberg called this painting the Evening Star. Prior to that, it had been called simply 117. And that's the number, in fact, it's still chalked on the back of this painting, number 117. So Turner gave this painting to the National Gallery. Well, sort of, yes. When Turner died in 1851, his will stipulated that all his oil paintings should be given to the nation. And in fact, Turner started writing his will in about 1831, around about the time when this painting might have been painted. Was he thinking about this painting when he was instructing his solicitor to write his will? How can we ever know? Turner's will was contested by his relatives. They didn't want Turner's intentions to be carried out because what Turner wanted was his legacy to be enshrined so that subsequent generations of artists, of art lovers, of the public could be exposed to his paintings, could engage with his work. Initially, he wanted to establish a charity for poor artists. Initially, he also wanted to have a special gallery for his paintings where they could be exhibited to help raise money for this charity. His will then went through a number of different manifestations. He wrote and rewrote it a number of times. And it's quite complicated, really, to know exactly what it was that he did want. There seemed to be a number of conflicting things going on there. So when his relatives contested it, it was taken all the way through the courts. And in fact, it took about 6 years until 1856 before a decision was made by the Court of Chancery. And the decision was that the relatives could have all the money. They were delighted. The nation could have all of the oils, finished and unfinished, and all the works on paper in Turner's possession. Now, that may or may not be what Turner wanted. It's not, as I say, clear from his will whether the finished works were separate from the unfinished works. There were about 100 paintings that were considered to be finished, about 182 paintings that were considered to be unfinished, and over 19,000 works on paper. Think about that a moment. 19,000 works on paper. That's an absolutely huge amount of art. And the National Gallery, frankly, didn't know what to do with it. We were not as big then as we are now in terms of our size, in terms of the galleries that are available to us. And suddenly to find we had 100 paintings by one artist that we were forced to exhibit, required to exhibit by law, upset the view, the vision that people had of what the National Gallery was. Much less, what could we do with all the unfinished paintings, all the works that were considered to be unexhibitable. And this was one of them, which is why it's called, or initially called, number 117. Didn't even warrant a name, didn't even warrant a title. And when we think that in Turner's own lifetime, paintings that he exhibited at the Royal Academy were considered by critics to be unfinished. He was criticized for his use of color. He was criticized for his fugitive effects. He was criticized for the indistinction of some of his finished works. When we think about that and we look at this painting, I think it can come as no surprise that people at the time did not consider this to be worthy of being shown to members of the public. Now, I can see some of you are a little bit sort of perturbed by that very thought. We'll maybe come to that a bit later. So the National Gallery had a bit of a problem on its hands. What were we going to do with all these paintings? Well, one option was that we exhibited them elsewhere. And for a while, some of them were exhibited in South Kensington. For a while, some of them were exhibited in Clarence House. But that could not last forever. If we think about the bulk of paintings by Turner, and we think about this particular painting, if we look very carefully at it, is it finished? What do we think? If we look hard, can we make an opinion? Can we judge? Well, lots of things about it, to me, look very unfinished. Here, there is a sort of a mark, and it looks very much like there may at one point have been a boat, which Turner has painted over. If we look down here particularly, there are all sorts of painted marks, very indistinct. It's not clear, I think, what Turner's intention might have been. So maybe this painting was unfinished. Perhaps Turner started it and decided, for reasons that we can never know, that it wasn't going the way that he wanted. He started, he worked a little bit of it, he covered bits over, and then he just thought, no, this isn't going in the direction I wanted to go. I'm going to put it down and put my efforts into something else. And so it just happened to be in his studio when he died, and we got it as part of the bequest. But maybe he did consider it to be finished. Maybe for him, this painting is saying everything he wanted to say. Maybe his experiments with light, his experiments with color, for him were working beautifully and perfectly here. But he recognized that members of the public in mid-19th century Britain or early 19th century Britain were unready for this kind of painting. So he put it to one side for his own personal enjoyment. Now, we have no way of knowing, no way of finding out what Turner's opinion of this painting was. He left no records. We have nothing written down. Does that matter? Does that matter to you? When you look at it, does it matter what Turner thought? Does it matter if it's finished? Can we enjoy it as an equivalent work of art to, say, the Fighting Temeraire, even if we think it is not finished? How are we to take a painting that we accept may not be the conclusion of Turner's intention? Now, you've got to make your own minds up about this. I can't tell you. But what I can say is that for curators and critics after Turner died, this was a very important question. About 6 years after the Turner bequest arrived at the National Gallery, there was an exhibition here of watercolors, and quite a number of unfinished watercolors that were recognized as not being finished, were exhibited. Now, I think that's remarkable. In a very short space of time, Turner's reputation had gone from one where his finished works were considered to be too out there and weird, to one where his unfinished works could be considered to be exhibited at the National Gallery. And it's been suggested, and I think I slightly agree, that this process of showing his unfinished works together with his finished works allows us to think about him and what he's doing in a new way that we don't get with lots of other artists. We don't get a chance to see the unfinished works of very many painters, much less shown next to their finished works. And if we accept that there's an equivalence between the two, maybe when we come to this, we can accept it as a work of art in its own right. Now, lots of critics at the time said that these sort of things should be shown to members of the public because they helped us to learn. They helped us to learn what Turner was doing. His working methods were very carefully protected by him. He didn't allow very many people to come and watch him paint. He would come on varnishing days at the Royal Academy in a bravura performance before members of the public came in, but only other artists could see him adding bits, taking bits away from paintings, and then walk out without talking to anyone. But nobody really saw him in his studio. Nobody followed his technique. And it was thought that paintings like this might help us know how Turner produced the paintings that he produced. So we can see, for instance, that he started with this blue, beautiful blue sky that comes down, comes all the way down. That perhaps is the underpainting. And then he painted gradually on top the beautiful clouds, the grey clouds here, and then finally the colors of the sun. So we can see the process by which Turner went through. We can see a little bit of, to use a phrase of Ruskin's, the master's mind, the movement of the master's mind. So when we look at a painting like this, it's educative. If we were artists, we could say to ourselves, yes, now suddenly I can see what Turner was doing. I don't have to try and work it out by looking at the finished paintings. I can work it out by looking at a halfway stage, perhaps. Okay, so that's quite interesting. Other critics said that we should be looking at this painting not to learn how to paint like Turner, but as a warning, don't paint like Turner. For a long time after he died, it was widely held that Turner's great paintings, his important paintings, the peak of his career was at the beginning of his life, around about the 1820s perhaps, 1810s, 1820s. Those were the paintings that showed him at his best. And by the time we get to the 1830s, he's already on a downward spiral. By the time we get to the 1840s, he's frankly just a bit crazy. And by the time we get to that time in his career, lots of critics were saying that his painting style had become one of total effect. He's only painting light effects. He's only painting things that are going to impress us, in the same way as going on a roller coaster might impress us. It's fun, but ultimately empty. And that's what people said about those sort of paintings. And this painting, I think people would have said exactly that about. It's all about effect. It's all about light. It's indistinct. What is a landscape artist doing painting this? This is surely not a representation of what you can see. If Turner was stood here, he could not see this. You could not see this. This is not real, in the sense that this is not capturing something that can be seen by us in our world. This is, to use a very loaded word, an impression. Turner's impression of what might be seen here. Turner's thinking about what light effects might occur if we could see this. This is not about observed reality. And for lots of critics and artists as well, that was not what art was about. Art was not about these kind of effects. Art was about getting us to think about our world by watching it, by observing it. So, it could have an education effect by putting us off. One of the effects of the Turner bequest is that suddenly everybody, all of us, had access to an enormous amount of work by one artist. In fact, it's true to say that today the Turner bequest is the single biggest group of works of art by any one artist in a public collection. So, whatever you thought about Turner, whether you thought these sort of paintings were not very good or whether you thought that he was amazing, you couldn't escape him. So the effect of giving his paintings to the nation was in some ways exactly what he wanted. His legacy continued again and again and again. And whenever people thought about British art, they had to consider Turner. They couldn't ignore him because he was right here at the National Gallery. But, of course, things change. Critical opinions change. And more to the point, the art world changed. Very dramatically, in fact. In France, in around the 1870s, an artist started to take a different view of what landscape painting might be. And they were, and I've already used the word, the Impressionists. They were painting not exactly what we could all see if we were looking, say, at this scene. They were painting their feelings, their impressions of what that scene might be. And it didn't take very long for British critics to start making connections between what they thought the Impressionists were doing and what they thought Turner was doing. And they started to write about Turner not as somebody who was a great artist at the beginning of the 19th century and then went into a sad decline later. They started writing about Turner as somebody who was ahead of the curve. He was modern. He was contemporary. He was the Impressionists avant la lettre. He, in fact, blazed a path for these French artists. And why that was important was because it enabled British art critics to say that effectively Britain had invented the Impressionists. And funnily enough, in this country, that view was very popular. So towards the end of the 19th century, there was a marked shift in the way that people thought about Turner. Suddenly, all the things that Turner had done wrong in the end of his career, his use of colour, his interest in light, his interest in form, which people didn't like in his own lifetime, now became exactly the very thing that people liked most. What impact might that have had on the National Gallery? How might these critical changes of opinion and changes in the art world impacted on what happened here? Well, in about 1905, the trustees of the National Gallery got together and they decided that there were 22 paintings which previously had been thought of as completely unexhibitable, trash, rubbish. In fact, most of them hadn't even been framed. Lots of them had been rolled up and left in storage underground. So 22 of these paintings were retrieved from the depths of the National Gallery, framed, cleaned if necessary, and exhibited in what became a very successful and famous exhibition in a new gallery, or rather a new wing at the time of the National Gallery of British Art, opened in 1897, and we might now know it today by its current name of the Tate. It became a Tate in 1932. It was recognized by the trustees of the National Gallery that we just didn't have enough space to show works of Western art and to be a National Gallery of British art. We simply couldn't put everything together. So when the National Gallery of British Art was established, it was a great opportunity to send lots of works that we had to them. Now, the National Gallery has never really collected British paintings, not in a systematic way. And at around this time, most of the paintings that we had, just like the Turner bequest, had come to the National Gallery from bequests. People had left them to us. In fact, towards the end of Turner's life, when it was known that his will left all his paintings to the National Gallery, we decided we weren't going to buy any anyway, because we get all of his. So we didn't need to spend any money on his. So we had a very good, but not very focused collection of paintings by British artists. And gradually, they were sent off to Millbank, to what's now Tate Britain. And this exhibition in the National Gallery of British Art in 1905, as I say, was a huge success. And this painting particularly, people focused on, and people commented on the fact that it was incredible. They liked the effect of the light coming through. They loved the calmness, the stillness of it. They loved the fact that it seemed very modern, very modernist perhaps. So in the space of about 50 years, opinion had changed so radically from despising these sort of works by Turner to actually preferring these kind of works by Turner. Now, I don't know what you guys think when you have a look at the paintings along this wall, or if you go to the Tate, you go to the Turner wing of the Tate, and you have a look at his paintings. What kind of paintings you like, whether you like these kind of later works or whether you like the earlier works. But one of the effects of the change of opinion has been that not only do more people like these sort of works, but these sort of works are preferred because they have no content. There is no narrative here. What is happening with the boy and the dog, we don't know, we can't say, but we're not intended, I don't think, to connect this to a poem or a literary source. But lots of Turner's paintings are. Lots of Turner's paintings are specifically linked to other sources. That's where he gets his inspiration from. And for a long time, that meant that people rather ignored all those things about Turner, all the kind of things that placed him within his own lifetime, all the things that not just Turner was doing, but his contemporaries were doing as well, thinking about painting in terms of how it connected to poetry or the Bible or classical literature. And I think part of the reason that we have jettisoned some of that kind of thinking about Turner is that largely we don't think about those sort of things. We don't read the same poems that Turner read. We don't read the Bible the way that Turner read it. We don't read classical literature anymore. So those references that for Turner's contemporaries would have been completely well known, to us are opaque. We don't understand them. Whereas when we look at this, we don't need any references. We just need to be able to accept Turner's use of paint in front of us. So I mentioned that paintings by British artists started going to Tate. And the decisions as to what should go and what should not go are very often not minuted. So we don't really know how the trustees and curators came to some of their decisions. But we do know that they decided to keep some paintings because they related to paintings by artists that we have here from the rest of Europe, so they could be seen within a bigger context of European painting. But we also know that they made some decisions on what to keep because people liked them. They wanted popular paintings that people were going to come and see. Not much has changed, perhaps. So, although this painting went to Tate, in fact, it's been to Tate about 3 times and back again, it's always come back because I think that it is recognized that this painting does connect to people. Despite the fact that in the beginning of its life, it was considered to be unexhibitable, to be not worth showing. Now, it's incredibly popular. It's a painting that people love. It's a painting that maybe doesn't connect us to the story of Western art. It maybe doesn't connect us to some of the earliest paintings that we have. But it connects us, I think, not deliberately, but it is a stepping stone from the paintings in the National Gallery to the more modernist paintings in the Tate. It's a way of looking at what we have and thinking about how that impacts on future appreciation of art and the future display of art. Thank you very much indeed.